Desperate men do desperate things, and here is the ultimate proof. Number 20. In 1988, Chicago's most brazen prison escape happened. An inmate, Victor Thomas, wanted for 3 murders in California, was awaiting trial at the Cook County Jail Complex when he chipped away at a bar of soap. He painted it with a black marker to make it look like a gun. He held it to an officer's head and forced him to take his uniform off. He said, "I'm facing 25 to life. I'll kill you in a minute." Then he slipped into his new clothes and headed out the door. And for good measure, he also took the officer's wallet. Police radios soon crackled with reports that the inmate was armed with a .357 Magnum, obviously one that smelled very citrusy. They chased after him, determined to get their man, but Thomas was fast. He got away, and the TV news, instead of mentioning the soap weapon, announced that Thomas was armed and dangerous. A few days later, a state trooper tapped on the window of a car. Inside, Victor Thomas slept soundly, and just like that, his dream of being free turned into a nightmare. He apparently was somewhat of an artist, said a detective, an artist who is now getting old in prison. As a famous prison warden once said, "Some guys you just can't reach." And oh boy, was this next fella unreachable. Number 19. 28-year-old Blaze Ayers decided that he'd had enough of Jackson County Jail in Arizona. His escape plan was simple. During recreation, bust a hole in the ceiling and crawl to freedom. But like many of the guys you'll hear about in this video, Ayers should have planned better. First, he was making a whole lot of noise as dust fell into the room below. Second, he probably should have calculated his body weight versus the roofing tiles. Soon, officers were standing below with their guns pointed upward like hunters waiting for prey to fall. And they immediately yelled for him to get down, but Ayers was in no mood for surrender. He kept going, and then, crash! He fell through and landed right at the feet of the officers. And as luck would have it, it was in the booking room, so right back where he started. Ayers wasn't the kind of man to back down from a good fight, so it took a few blasts with the tasers to make him see reason. His escape attempt got him a new charge of criminal mischief to top off the battery charge that had sent him to jail in the first place. The question with this next story is, just how low would you sink to get out of prison? Number 18. In the winter of 1987, William Edward Sherburne was not impressed with Oklahoma's newest medium-security prison, the James Crabtree Correctional Center. He figured that the best way out was the dirty way out. He hid himself inside of a garbage bag and stayed quiet, waiting for it to be taken outside and thrown into the dumpster. He soon found himself among a stinky cluster of prisoner waste. It was a nightmare and dark, so he just dusted himself off and calmly walked to his freedom. Or so he thought. Like a lot of prisoners, Sherburne lacked self-control. He was looking at 25 years behind bars for assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, and that was on top of a concurrent 20-year term for obtaining merchandise under false pretenses. In other words, he was screwed, so he left. But he made the rookie mistake during his escape of not turning on stealth mode. He watched a woman filling her car with gas, and he waited. After paying, the woman returned to her vehicle, and Sherburne ran at her, knocking her down, and then drove off to Oklahoma City. Every police radio in the city was saying his name, and soon he was in a high-speed chase, ending with him crashing and being rearrested. He then picked up escape and motor theft charges to go with the 25 years. Now let's get serious and see what happens when escape turns into something much more brutal. Number 17. If there is one rule an escaped prisoner needs to stick to, it's keep a low profile. But in 18th century London, Jack Sheppard didn't get the memo. Jack was a habitual criminal, tired of the workhouse and low wages, so he embarked on a life of crime. In 1723, he was caught pickpocketing with his female accomplice and sent to a high-security prison. But Jack and the woman, conveniently locked in the same cell, filed through their manacles and used knotted bedsheets to climb down the wall. Jack quickly became a hero to the poor, a man who had a hard life and simply couldn't be held down. And when he burgled houses or held up coaches as a highwayman, he was always polite and he never used violence. Now nicknamed Honest Jack and Gentleman Jack, he got caught again and stood in the Old Bailey as the judge sentenced him to death. Death? No problem. He pulled out the grate on the window at Newgate Prison. Soon he was dressed as a woman, thanks to clothes his friends had smuggled in, and he was back doing what he did best, thieving. But Jack had a major problem. Well, he actually had two. He couldn't stay off the booze, and he had a weakness for women. He was back in the taverns of London drinking when they arrested him once more. This time they bolted his leg irons to the floor, but Jack took advantage of a disturbance after a fellow criminal had his throat slashed, and like an early Houdini, he picked his locks. With his leg irons still dangling from his ankles, he picked his way through 6 barred doors and then down a 60-foot wall. The writer Daniel Defoe of Robinson Crusoe fame couldn't believe it, telling people the devil must be on Jack's side. No one, not ever, had broken out of prison like that. Now a full-blown folk hero, Jack disguised himself as a beggar and stole a rich man's clothes. Suddenly he was a dandy with a pocket watch and a wig, a silk suit, and a wonderful silver sword. But Jack's temptations kicked in again. He got loaded with 2 prostitutes and was arrested while living at large. This time he was put under 24-hour surveillance in the castle part of the prison, with 300 pounds of iron weighing him down. Sentenced to death again, his fans petitioned the king to send him to the English colonies instead. But not this time. Jack swung by a rope. When a third of London's population drank to celebrate Jack's life, they heard the final twist. He had hidden a penknife in his jacket. His plan had been to cut the rope mid-execution and then disappear into the crowd of adoring fans. Jack fought the law, and the law won, which, as you'll now see, is usually how it goes, even for the best in the business. Number 16. Pascal Paillet holds the record for the most prison escapes via a helicopter. With a long history in French organized crime, he had some serious underworld connections. So when he was imprisoned in 1999, after a security guard had been shot dead in a bank armored car robbery, he didn't intend to stay in prison for long. He had his friend land a helicopter in the prison yard, and off they went as other inmates watched on in shock. The authorities were embarrassed and they vowed to track Pascal down. But 2 years later, Paillet made their faces redder. This time he was using the helicopter to spring some friends out of prison. And it was the same prison too. 3 men leaving in Paillet's ride. They were caught 3 weeks later though, and the French, not wanting to take any risks, put Paillet under strict surveillance and solitary confinement, transferring him every few months so he couldn't make plans to escape. He was the most surveilled prisoner in the country, writing letters to the government complaining that his incarceration was a form of torture. No one in a million years thought he could escape, but Paillet liked the challenge, and sure enough, in 2007, as officers were slacking because of the Bastille Day celebrations, Paillet's friends took a pilot hostage and they got him to fly to the prison roof. Armed, the men busted their way down to the solitary block and they took Paillet out of there, later releasing the pilot unharmed. France was astounded. This man was incredible. The men fled to the countryside and they rented a luxury cottage, telling their wealthy neighbors that they were sportsmen taking a break from racing. Their guests, not realizing they were murderers and some of France's biggest drug traffickers, invited them around to their cottages for 5-course meals and burgundy, as the men told stories of their great sporting adventures. But on the day the men had been invited to take their rich neighbors' horses for a gallop through the vineyards of the Côte d'Aron, French cops turned up armed to the teeth. A shady character in the French underworld had tipped them off. The men were arrested without shots being fired, while cops found huge stashes of money, guns, and swag. Paillet will spend a long time in prison, but this time the French authorities have kept his location hidden, not even allowing him visits. Now you've seen French and British escape artists, let's take a look at an American who beat the system only for the system to score a slam dunk in the final seconds. Number 15. 1998. Texas inmate Stephen J. Russell managed to get himself transferred to a hospice when a judge took pity on him. His HIV had progressed to AIDS and it looked like his days were numbered. And sure enough, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice received a letter. Poor old Stephen had kicked the bucket. But this guy had made a career out of lying. He was a con artist extraordinaire. His first prison sentence in the early 90s came after he faked an accident and claimed insurance. Fraud. But he didn't much like being locked up, so Stephen got a hold of some streetwear at his low-security prison, impersonated an FBI agent, and strolled to freedom. It didn't last long and he eventually finished his sentence, but once outside he did what he did best. He lied. He faked a bunch of documents about his education and work experience and landed himself a cushy executive job as a chief financial officer at a medical management firm. There he embezzled $800,000. Alas, he was caught, and with a $950,000 bond, it wasn't looking like he would make bail. So he just called the court pretending to be the judge and got it reduced to a very manageable $45,000. And then he vanished, gone. And this time he wasn't going back. Except he was. After a manhunt, he was sentenced to 45 years. Now in maximum security, he used the dye from a bunch of marker pens to transform a prison uniform into what looked like doctor's scrubs. Stephen walked right past prison guards and medical staff and out the front gate. As helicopters searched for him, he knocked on a house and, still in doctor mode, pretended there had been a car accident. Teaming up with his boyfriend, he then headed to Mississippi to settle down, only to be caught again and handed another 45 years. This time, he was put under strict surveillance, but he had the perfect plan. He figured that he would get sick. After shoveling laxatives down his throat for weeks, he got real skinny. As a fraudster of the highest order, After reading up on AIDS symptoms, he'd managed to make his medical records look like he'd been diagnosed with HIV by using the prison typewriter. He made a series of calls to inform the prison about a non-existent treatment program and then convinced the judge that he needed hospice care. From the hospice, Stephen phoned the prison with the sad news that he was dead, later faking a death certificate and sending it to the Texas courts. Stephen was great at getting out, but he was terrible at staying out. After picking up a fax, he was arrested yet again, and this time he got 144 years, 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He had an IQ of 163, so you've got to wonder, why didn't he just leave the country? Stephen was smart, but he obviously wasn't very flexible. This next guy, well, he was the most flexible man on the planet. Number 14. South Korean Choi Gap-bok was arrested in 2012 for robbery. He wasn't what you would call a hardened criminal, but if there was one thing that he could do well, it was flex his body. He'd been a yoga instructor for over 2 decades, so once in jail, he decided to bend his body and then slip through the food slot in his cell door. With the help of some skin ointment, he got his 5 4 inch, 114-pound body through a hole just 6 inches tall and 18 inches wide, leaving pillows and clothes under his blanket to make it look like he was sleeping. It took just 34 seconds for a lifetime of fame. The media started calling him the Korean Houdini, but the authorities weren't laughing. They launched a massive manhunt and he was nabbed after 6 days. The thing is, the authorities should have known better. Years before his whole escape, he'd once slipped through the bars on a bus carrying prisoners. This next guy has to be one of the unluckiest prison escapees of all time. Number 13. In the 1980s, prisons in Chile were bursting at the seams thanks to President Augusto Pinochet, the tyrant who had ruled the country by torturing and murdering his opponents. But Chileans, they couldn't take anymore, so in 1986, a group of urban guerrilla fighters ambushed Pinochet's armored Mercedes-Benz. They let loose a hail of bullets from machine guns while making good use of rocket-propelled grenade launchers. 5 of his bodyguards were killed and 11 others injured, but Pinochet survived with only a few scratches. He was already a tyrant, so suffice it to say, he cracked down hard, sending dozens of people to prison, many after confessions which were extracted from torture. By the time 1990 rolled around, about 50 of those political prisoners decided it was time to break out. They took off in the night through a 300-foot tunnel beneath the Santiago public jail. But one guy was too fat and he got stuck in the tunnel. 6 others were soon caught, and the rest got away, later speaking on radio broadcasts about how they'd been unfairly imprisoned without due process and tortured. "Today, we recovered our freedom," they gloated, saying nothing about their chubby buddy. Let's now take a look at one of the best prison escapes in history, one that had the worst ending. Number 12. On the 24th of March 1944, 76 Allied officers broke out of the German prisoner of war camp, Stalag Luft III. It was an amazing feat, but things turned very dark. The Nazis believed that they had built an escape-proof camp, but the Allied prisoners didn't agree. Led by British officers, inmates from Canada, Australia, Poland, and other Allied nations decided they had had enough of hunger and beatings and they were getting out. For months, they secretly dug tunnels, 3 of them named Tom, Dick, and Harry. Their logic was simple. If the Germans found one, they'd never imagine that there were others. As the men wandered around the camp, dribbling soil from their pockets, others bribed the guards, sewed German uniforms, and counterfeited documents. They had to dig far past the double barbed wire fence and the goon boxes where guards stood with their searchlights and machine guns. They had built a working printing press and forged thousands of documents because tunneling out was one thing, staying alive on the run was another. The tunnels were long and deep, so they made air pumps out of kit bags and fed air through pipes made from empty milk tins. Engineering-wise, it was brilliant. After Tunnel Tom was discovered, they abandoned Dick and they focused entirely on Harry. Then, on that March night, the men slipped out into the woods. 200 had been the aim, but things went wrong. When the 77th man was spotted, the sirens began to wail. The Germans were furious. Thousands of troops, police, and Gestapo agents joined the hunt. Adolf Hitler wanted all of the escapees shot, but his officers talked him down, warning that it would be disastrous propaganda. In the end, 50 of the recaptured men were executed. The Germans shot them while supposedly marching them back to camp, so they could claim that the men were trying to run. The good news is that 3 men escaped and they made it to Sweden, and 1 reached Spain. The British government called the mass executions cold-blooded acts of butchery. After the war, 13 Gestapo officers were hanged for their role in the murders. If you think that was bad, it wasn't a patch on what went down in Australia. Number 11. August 1944, and over 1,100 Japanese prisoners of war at a camp near Cowra in New South Wales, Australia, decided they had had enough. For them, being a POW was the ultimate shame. Many believed dying in an escape attempt was more honorable than staying behind the wire. What followed was the bloodiest prison breakout in human history. Armed with homemade knives, clubs, and anything that could be swung, stabbed, or thrown, they rushed the barbed wire fences. They threw blankets over the top and hoped to get across before being gunned down. The camp was already a chaotic place. Over 2,200 Japanese prisoners, plus 14,700 Italians and 1,600 Germans. The guards were young, inexperienced, and the Japanese believed that they won't stop all of us. Then the shouting began. Banzai! As horns blared and hundreds of men charged the traps, some attacking guards with garroting wires, others swinging nail-studded clubs. But once the powerful Vickers machine guns opened up, it was like mowing down Skittles, men falling one after another. Only 359 POWs managed to break out, and many who failed chose death over the shame of capture. And of the escapees, all were caught within 10 days. Many were killed and others took the shame route to death. 4 Australian soldiers died as well. It was a bloodbath. Times have changed a lot since then. These days, escapees are so dumb that they post videos on social media. Number 10. In May 2025, 10 men at a jail in New Orleans broke out through a hole after removing a toilet and getting over the barbed wire fence. And these were some serious criminals with histories of violence. When officers arrived and saw the missing toilet, they were greeted with a goodbye message. Too easy, LOL, complete with a spelling mistake. All the men had friends on the outside who had hid them and fed them, but one man in particular was very brazen. He videoed himself at home and posted the videos to social media, asking for help from rapper Lil Wayne and President Donald Trump. It seems that he didn't hold out much hope for staying free, though, pleading for help when he was inevitably back in custody. He was the 9th of the men to be caught, with a guy named Derek Groves showing exceptional skills to evade the police. The case was all over the media with thousands of snitches calling hotlines, leading to Groves, a killer of 2 men at the 2018 Mardi Gras, being caught. This next guy had an unfair advantage. He had been a cop. Number 9. Grant Hardin used to be the chief of police in Gateway, Arkansas, and he was a tyrant in his small town of 200 on the border with Missouri. He'd once dragged an elementary school teacher into a toilet and assaulted her. After that, he graduated to murder. When he was locked up, people started calling him the Devil in the Ozarks. In May 2025, he escaped from the North Central Unit Prison. Considered armed and dangerous, half the state was looking for him. The sheriff's office warned people to lock their doors and stay vigilant as long as this sociopath was on the loose. I don't think he'll be taken alive, said one of the victim's sisters. But a week and a half later, he was caught. There was a scuffle, but no bullets were fired. In this day and age, it's hard to stay hidden, a lesson 2 young enterprising men in the UK learned in 2017. Number 8. We have to give these next 2 prisoners an A for effort. They were sharing a cell in HMP Pentonville, one inside for burglary and the other for a string of violent offenses, including introducing the pavement to a policeman's teeth. A dangerous man, sure, but he was smart as a whip. They were on the G-Wing, the same place an inmate had been murdered just before the escape, so not exactly a pleasant environment. On the morning of the breakout, prison officers called their names and they got no answer. Strange, because through the inspection hatch it looked like both men were fast asleep in their beds. But looking closer, the crafty blokes had stuffed their bedsheets with clothes and food items to create the illusion of bodies. Looking even closer, officers noticed the real trick. The men had cut through the bars of the outer cell using cutting tools that they had somehow acquired and then made their way out of the prison toward a barred window. They had then used a bedsheet to slide down a CCTV pole. But one of them injured himself while sliding down the pole. When the cops found him at his sister's place, he had dyed his hair and had a broken leg. The other was caught after 6 days, turning their 5- and 10-year sentences into something a little longer. As you'll now see, it's not surprising that guys break out of British prisons. They haven't been updated in 250 years. Number 7. Wandsworth Prison is one of the largest houses of correction in the UK. Built in 1851, it looks like something out of a Victorian horror movie. Squalid, dangerous, and utterly depressing. So in 2023, a man named Daniel Khalife decided to get out. This was a former British Army network engineer and soldier who had turned into a spy for Iran, allegedly passing trade secrets after telling Iranian intelligence he was MI6. In September, while still awaiting sentencing, he was working in the prison kitchens, wearing his chef's hat and checkered trousers. One minute he was making mystery meat sandwiches, and the next he was gone. Officers were stunned, but no one had the remotest idea that Khalife had used bed sheets and straps to attach himself under a delivery truck. This was a major criminal. Well, he was for the British state, so airports were put on high alert while cops scoured every inch of London. He might have been smart, but he wasn't a good escapee. A few days later, cops spotted him still hanging around the Grand Union Canal in Northolt. Officers, tasers at the ready, ordered him to get on the ground. In his pocket was a mobile phone with a message to an Iranian contact that said, "I wait." He was sent to the Belmarsh prison, not quite as depressing as Wandsworth, but definitely where the serious criminals are kept. He's now serving 14 years. So what have we learned so far? Keep a low profile, don't get wasted, don't post on Instagram, don't visit close family and friends, and for the love of God, get the hell out of the area you escaped from. But some men just don't listen. Number 6. Frank Mitchell was one of those old-school London gangsters back in the 50s and 60s. His upbringing was a montage of beatings, borstals, and prison officers treating him like a human punching bag. After slashing a guard across the face with a knife, the courts decided that this young man was mentally defective. They threw him into a psychiatric hospital, but did he stay quiet? Of course he didn't. He broke out with 2 other guys and robbed a man of his clothes, persuading him with an iron bar across the skull. When cops caught up with him, he went at them with 2 meat cleavers trying to rearrange their faces. They got him locked up in the notorious Broadmoor, the madhouse where Britain's most violent and unstable criminals end up. But Frankie, he wasn't having it, and he broke out soon after. True to form, he broke into a posh couple's house and held them hostage with an axe at their throats. After that, he earned the nickname the Mad Axeman. Frankie was really good at escaping, but terrible at staying on the run. They caught him and sent him to HM Prison Dartmoor. Stone walls stacked on stone walls, surrounded by armed guards. This place had been swallowing prisoners since the early 19th century. But Frankie, he seemed to like it. He calmed down. The authorities thought they'd made a breakthrough. Just give him a budgerigar to take care of, and maybe he won't try to chop off our heads. Years went by and he appeared to accept prison life. They even allowed him out into the moors where he'd have a beer or 2 in the countryside pubs. The warden told him, "Keep this up, Frank, and I'll ask for an early release." And then one day he asked to feed the ponies, and Mad Frank was gone. Little did they know he had the help of the notorious Kray twins, violent London gangsters. And little did the Kray twins know that they had bitten off more than they could chew. Soon the British tabloids and the public were howling. Ponies and birds for the most violent man in Britain? A huge manhunt followed. Meanwhile, Frankie was back to his old tricks, acting like a lunatic and putting the Krays on edge. And being the nice gentlemen they were, their solution was simple: kill him. In 1966, a bunch of the Krays heavies fired 12 shots into him, and that was the end of the Mad Axeman. And one of the Krays later admitted that helping Frankie escape was one of the biggest mistakes of his life, although his body was never found. The moral of the story is, if a deranged psychopath seems content with his birds, leave him alone. Number 5. In 2022, Casey White was awaiting trial in a capital murder case when he escaped from the Lauderdale County Jail in Florence, Alabama. This case is unusual because his accomplice was a corrections officer, Vicky White, no relation. Casey's rap sheet was a litany of violence, including stabbing a 59-year-old woman to death. He was evil, and yet there was Vicky caught on CCTV marching Casey into a police car, his handcuffs and leg shackles on, making it look like a routine transfer. She said she was taking him to the county courthouse, but in reality she had just sold her house for well below market value and was getting out of town. Investigators later found out that she and Casey had secretly been getting it on inside the jail. They drove across the U.S. in stolen vehicles and stayed in cheap motels while the case terrified Americans watching from their living rooms. After a month on the run, they got into a high-speed chase with the police. Their Cadillac was rammed from behind and swerved off the road. Casey stepped out with his hands up, yelling, "Please help my wife. She shot herself in the head and I didn't do it." It seems that Vicky couldn't live with the shame. She died a few hours later. As for Casey, he was charged with her death, but he took a plea deal. He will spend the rest of his days behind bars. The twist to the story is that Vicky, 56, was about 20 years his senior. She'd been a CO for 17 years and had once won Employee of the Year. It seems that after a violent marriage, she fell for the wrong man at work. All 6 foot 9 inches, his body a patchwork of white supremacist tattoos. Loneliness can do strange things to a person. So can incarceration, and that's why this next guy got in touch with his creative side. Number 4. Ohioan John Parsons was a bad man, a habitual thief, who in 2005 got into a chase that ended up with a dead cop down an alleyway. With a life sentence to look forward to, John decided at Ross County Jail to get creative. He built an escape rope out of bed sheets and toilet paper, hiding it in a wall that he'd patched up with toothpaste and Jolly Ranchers. And off he went into the darkness, leaving a lot of red faces behind him and the FBI offering a reward of $125,000. But John was smart. He used his outdoor survival skills to evade the nationwide manhunt until he was found 3 months later living in a makeshift shack that he'd built in the woods. John was moved to maximum security, and he is still in prison today, probably wishing that he'd pursued a career in the arts and crafts. This next guy, well, he should have been a drag queen. Number 3. 55-year-old convicted murderer Francisco Herrera Argueta was sick of life at his dingy Honduran prison, so he decided to get out. The plan was simple: wait for visiting time, dress up like a woman, and walk out with the other wives and daughters. At the risk of offending him, he didn't exactly make the best woman. He looked more like a tweaker in a wig and a dress, and that's what the guards thought when they saw him walking funny. Argueta had made the mistake of not practicing the female gait, and when he spoke, his voice was too deep. Don Chico, as his gang called him, was soon back in handcuffs, his blusher running and his nail varnish a waste of good money. If you think this kind of thing couldn't happen in the US, think again. Number 2. In 2023, 2 men facing drug and firearm charges escaped from the Philadelphia Correctional Center after cutting through a fence. One of them, Nasir Grant, 24, had a little bit of help from some female buddies and soon found himself able to walk down the street without a care in the world. He was Muslim and had Muslim friends, so it was easy enough to get a hold of the full Muslim garb and a head covering. But the cops weren't fooled. He was walking out of a house when, with guns pointed at him, he didn't even bother trying to sound like a woman. As for his escape pal, 18-year-old Amin Hurst, he was wanted in connection with 4 murders. He was captured 10 days later and in 2024 was convicted of every one of those murders. Game over. This next escape is like something Hollywood would dream of. Number 1. Everyone knows, get caught selling drugs in Indonesia and you are in very serious trouble. But a Chinese man named Kai Changpan still tried to smuggle a load of speed in 2020. Facing a death sentence, he started digging. Over 8 months, using a small chisel, screwdriver, and trowel, he dug maybe the most remarkable one-person prison tunnel ever, 98 feet long and 6.5 feet deep. From there, he made it to the sewers, and soon he was like a rat scurrying through feces and filth, his death sentence fading behind him. He must have smelled like hell, but death is a powerful motivator, and then the police told the press that this wasn't even his first rodeo. He'd previously tried to break out of a police station cell by cutting into the wall. Indonesian authorities were pulling their hair out. A huge loss of face. Kai wasn't small time either. He'd been caught with almost 300 pounds of drugs. Maybe he had connections because he stayed missing for months. But as things tend to go, he was eventually found hiding in a factory and he was dead. Authorities said there was nothing suspicious and that Kai was depressed. Now go check out dumb prison escape attempts or click on this video.